Hey guys, it's Allie. Welcome back to Infertile AF, the podcast. This is episode 72 called Emily. Okay, before we get started, guys, I just wanted to remind you, if you haven't already, to check out Fertility Rally, which is the membership site that Blair Nelson and I co-founded on June 1st. And it's an amazing site. There's a free site. There's a member part of it where you can unlock tons of content, lots of events. We have an amazing support group every Wednesday night that the members have said that's their favorite thing so far. We have a lot of other events as well, resources, a blog, bonus podcasts, really cool merch, discounts on fertility-friendly products and services, and much, much more. So check it out at fertilityrally.com if you are going through something and you need support. We are all in this together. And as we always say, it's the worst club with the best members. All right, guys, let's get into it. So today, my guest is Emily, who is a friend of a friend who emailed me to share her story because she really wanted people to know what she went through, and she wanted to provide some hope to people that were feeling kind of down in the dumps or not sure how their journey was going to end. So she has a pretty dramatic story. A little bit of it I'll tell you, and then I'm going to let her tell it in her own words. But she had 7 unsuccessful IUIs, 4 miscarriages, all from natural conception, and then a very dramatic 5th pregnancy, which she will explain to you. So I'm going to let her get into it. Thank you for listening. And without further ado, this is Emily's infertility story. Hi, Emily. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks, Allie.
Thank you so much for reaching out to me. You have a pretty complicated story. You went through a lot. So I'm just going to let you do most of the talking, and we'll just kind of start with the beginning, which is, when did you start trying to have babies? And did you always want to? And what happened when you guys started trying?
Yes, I always wanted to have babies. It's just something that's always been very important to me, and I knew that I would. I think people who feel that way, they feel they've had a good maternal influence and they want to pass that on. It's always been something that's very important to me. Mm-hmm. And with that said, my husband and I, we really started when I was 32 and he was 34.
Okay.
And it's funny because prior to that, I remember being 30 years old. We were living in New Zealand at the time. And a kid, I was working at the version of like children's, like social services for children, seeing a lot of, rough cases, family cases and things like that. And one of the kids that I was supervising at the time asked if I was a mom. And I laughed it off because I'm like, I'm 30. What are you thinking? I'm too young for this. So we got started definitely later. And of course, you don't anticipate any of these issues.
Right.
But we moved back to the United States, and we went off when I was 32, went off the pill, and in August, I think, and got pregnant in December. And I remember it very well. It's right around Christmas time.
Mm-hmm.
We had a cocktail party scheduled at our house, and I'm going through all the motions of making cocktails, virgin cocktails. I'm drinking because immediately, as you know, when you're of that age, if you have certain behaviors like drinking and suddenly you're not, people automatically
right.
assume that you're pregnant.
I remember it being kind of fun in those beginning weeks before you've told everybody kind of secretly not drinking to pretending like you are, and like sitting on this big secret that like you feel very like proud to have.
Oh, totally. And it was great because I actually had friends who thought I was full on drunk. So I must have been doing a great job.
Oh,
cocktail party.
Academy Award level acting.
Yes, it was big time. It's interesting too, because I remember being around the Christmas tree. We hadn't told anybody. And at one point, my mother-in-law was over there. And I felt at this point, I would have been very super early on. it almost feels like I felt the implantation. There was like a sudden kind of pain,
Whoa,
in my lower abdomen. And that was interesting. And we went on later to find out that I was pregnant, kept it a secret. And we found out on Christmas Eve that I was miscarrying. And so we're going forward, with all the family plans through this, the biggest pain that my husband and I have ever felt. And obviously things went very differently because this is when we planned to tell our parents. We had purchased a book for them about being grandparents and just going through the motions that Christmas Eve. It was so hard trying to have any joy going through that. Was very difficult. One of the things that kind of seems to be so isolating is that although miscarriages are quite common, finding that person going through it at the same time, or that friend or that family member, you have people who love you so much and they don't know what to say and you don't know what to say or what you want to share. And so it leaves you, or it left me feeling very isolated.
Yeah.
And never really comforted by what anybody said during that time. So I was going on boards where you're seeing a lot of, people like, they give their stats. It's like a list of their medical stats, their children who are living, little emoticons that represent their angel babies. And there's all these, acronyms that you kind of have to like school yourself before you can even understand them.
I know there's still stuff that pops up on a daily basis. And I'm like, I have to Google it. I'm like, I don't know what that means.
Yes, totally. For sure.
Yeah.
It's different.
Okay. So you got through the holidays, which I'm sure was super rough. And then how was like the recovery and stuff? And how long before you guys started trying again?
So the recovery, it was not resolving fast enough. And so it did result in a D&C. And it was thought from my OB that it was a molar pregnancy due to some apparent inflammation or something.
Okay. Can you explain what that means?
It turned out that it wasn't. A molar pregnancy? I have no idea. Not normal. Not going to be a good thing. So it's funny because I went on to have many. It's not funny, but I went on to have many more miscarriages, and it's like you kind of pack that away. I felt very well cared for from my doctor, and I remember having a conversation with her, and her saying that we became very close, and she became an important part of our story. And I remember her saying, lots of people go on to have 3 miscarriages.
Yeah.
And in my mind, in that split second, I was like, oh no, I'm probably going to be one of those people.
Right. And also you're like, thanks for the uplifting message.
Yeah, definitely.
I Googled molar pregnancy, by the way.
Oh yeah. Okay. Do tell.
It says it's a non-cancerous tumor that develops in the uterus as a result of a non-viable pregnancy.
Oh, okay.
That is according to the interwebs and Memorial Sloan Kettering.
The interwebs. I'm sure I Googled it many times when I was when they went through this. But I just remember thinking, oh God, okay, so there's this, that sounds odd. Okay, I hope I'm not in it. It sounds terrible to have 3 miscarriages. That'll probably be me. And that sticks with me as something you ask yourself as you're going through this, did I cause this in some way? And you think that maybe people think you did. Is it stress or whatnot?
Right.
That is ultimately what goes on to happen, is a string of miscarriages with me. After that, in the winter and the summer, it was June, we were going on a vacation to the beach to be with my family, with my husband. And we were 6 weeks pregnant. And so we'd flown down and we were going to be with all of my family, siblings. And all my siblings do have kids. And I didn't feel a huge amount of jealousy, more than frustration of other people that are pregnant, because I did feel like it was coming for me. I wasn't one of those. I've talked to people who've had violent feelings towards people who are pregnant. But as it turns out, during that time, my sister-in-law was pregnant with her 4th.
Oh, wow.
And I felt nervous having had the miscarriage. And I remember sitting there out on a dock everybody knows at this point. And I don't think that we would have felt the need to tell people so early, except that we were with them. And it was something that was weighing heavy on our hearts and our emotions after the first. And so I remember sitting there on the dock and wondering if it's okay to have a Sprite, and my dad saying, it's okay, it's going to be okay. And, a couple of days later, I had a tremendous spotting started, and this became a major part of my life for the remainder of, even up till today. When you go to the bathroom, am I going to be having my period, or am I going to be miscarrying? And it turns out I started spotting and I was miscarrying. Yeah. For whatever reason, it was tremendously painful, and we went to the hospital there. That did resolve naturally. And it was also early at six weeks or so.
Wait, I want to talk about what you just said, because I completely relate to that. And that feeling of when you go to the bathroom and you wipe and you're like so scared to look at the toilet paper to see if there's blood, right? To be completely honest with you, I still, when I wipe after like going to the bathroom, the other night this happened to me and I was like, oh, I'm so glad I'm not in that place anymore where I'm terrified to look and see blood or not blood. Like I had that thought, like it doesn't go away. The fear, it's still there.
Yeah.
That's how like deep it is,
It doesn't. It's just like, it'll come up again and again. I think in this story in different ways. Definitely feel that way. And and in other ways at this point now, I'm not able to get pregnant. And naturally I can physically, but I've had a 8-doctor panel review our case. And we do have a child now. Right. It was a traumatic birth for both of us, but that wondering, am I pregnant now? Am I pregnant now? And it would actually be devastating for me if I did get pregnant, because we wouldn't be able to, I don't think I'd be able to carry it safely. I'd have to basically live in a hospital in order to do it, which we were willing to do at one point. Right. So it just kind of gets to the desperation, but it was that either that, am I miscarrying? Is there blood there? Is there spotting there? Or am I pregnant? Yeah. It just goes on. Right. So for years you were going through this, and you wrote in your initial email to me that you'd had 4 miscarriages, all from natural conception, and then 7 unsuccessful IUIs. And then you said that you had a 5th pregnancy. So, and that one went pretty sideways, right? So tell me about that one. Yeah, the 5th pregnancy, I think leading up to that, before the IUIs, we had infertility for like a year and a half, which was about the roughest. And we went through, I went through so many ways and means of going back to those boards of, should I eat pineapple rind? Should I stop drinking coffee? Acupuncture. I did an amazing amount of things that I thought might be helpful, that ultimately I think was just driving me crazy more than anything. Right. Wait, and you had deer antler, right? Deer antler melon. I went to a Chinese food store. I've never heard of this, Emily. I've never heard of that. Tell me about this. Yeah, there you go. Surprise. So I went to a Chinese food store, and I just researching on the interwebs, and it's like, this could be, helpful for fertility. And so I took a pill, and it was all in, Chinese writing that was deer antler velvet for fertility. And wow, that's a first. It did not have an impact, but we were desperate. Oh, I'm totally feel you. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't have done the same exact thing. I've said this before. If somebody would have said, like, at 4 a.m, you have to go to the corner store and buy a gallon of orange juice and drink it in 3 minutes. Like, I would have done that every 4 a.m, like every day. You know what I mean? Like, you get to the point where you're like, anything, I'll do anything. Oh yeah. I would have been right there with you. And so this is where I was. And I, coming to, with the 5th pregnancy, again, I feel like I'm not realizing this until I tell you the story. We had traveled down and were with my family, and discovered that I was pregnant at Thanksgiving. And I was terrified because it's like, here I go into this massive amount of fear from the past failures. At this point, we've had 4 miscarriages. And my husband and we're going down and almost kind of deliberating on this at the same time. And we just told my mom right away. And my husband got on the phone and he was like, we are not going this alone. We are calling a high risk OB and I'm going to get you in right away. So he just kind of went into autopilot and he was going to handle this and I'm going to go to this doctor. And I didn't want to go. I did not want to go to ultrasounds. I did not want to go through the HCG testing. And so he gets me hooked into this, convinced me, and I go, and at our appointment, our doctor was pregnant. And she came out. I had met her for a couple other visits as we were addressing infertility. So we moved on from the regular OB to a high risk to address infertility. And then we went on to a different practice to also address infertility. But I had known her from a couple of prior visits. And I developed an intense reaction that was later diagnosed as PTSD from the ultrasounds. Because there were so many horrible ultrasounds where you're learning that the pregnancy is no longer viable. And so with this one, the doctor came into the room and I would not even look at the ultrasound. My husband was there and I was looking at him. And I could see that he was recognizing something that he was happy about, heartbeat. And I'm just looking at him, wondering. And the doctor came in, she's looking at the screen and she is looking confused. And he said, that's the heartbeat. And the doctor said, it is the heartbeat. I need to leave the room and call your OB. And so she does that. And she comes back and said that she suspected, and it's been confirmed, that this is a corneal ectopic. And so about 2 to 4% of ectopics are this way. And it basically grows in an interstitial point of it's like in the tube and in the muscle, as I understand it. And it is very difficult to diagnose. And so it has a much higher mortality rate. Oh my God. And it can also start to read off as normal on the HCG numbers. So prior to that point, before we had that ultrasound, we had really wacko HCG reads where it's like, this one's good. Ooh, this one's not good. And so I'm on this roller coaster of I'm probably going to miscarry, to that high risk OB calling me and going, oh my gosh, I've never seen this happen before. Your numbers are good again. And so we just had no idea what to expect when we got there. But when the doctor came back and said that, it was, what does this mean? What does this mean? And she said, you have to abort this. We have to abort this tonight. And I was like, why? And she actually said, unless you want to die. And we had a very close relationship with my OB. And I guess they had been talking, and she cleared her schedule that day to kind of consult with me. And I remember leaving that appointment, understanding at that point that this is super high risk, for bursting and bleeding out. And I could not believe it. I felt that we were constantly finding ourselves in this unlucky, very unusual percentage. And I lost it. We got in the car and I was slobbering, just screaming my head off. I was so angry. And it just seems like this balance of, as you go through this with your partner, the ups and downs, he was more there for me when I needed him. I was constantly holding on to hope, taking him on this roller coaster that's ultimately very difficult for our marriage as you're trying to, schedule sex and tell him it's a great thing that we have to do this all the time and it's going to end well. As you're suffering through it. And he was there. He was solid as I was losing it.
In your email, you said you called it a dreadful sex life full of stress and dashed expectations. And I was like, yep. Been there, sister.
Oh yeah, totally. And so we go to the OB later, and she, I guess it was so unusual. They had to, she had performed one before. And so so it was kind of perfect that it was my OB who had performed one before, and she was going to be performing this one with the help of another surgeon. Mm-hmm. They had to fly instruments into Minneapolis.
Wow.
For that, which is unbelievable because that's such a hub of healthcare.
Right.
So it happened the next day. I lived with the scar. That was so hard. It just...
Like a physical scar or emotional or both?
All of it.
Yeah.
Physical and emotional.
Right.
And
so wait, I don't want to like brush past the fact that they told you could lose your life if you didn't have like emergency surgery.
That was her response.
That is so terrifying. How did you had to obviously go home and like wait till the next day, right? That must,
it wasn't that emergent. It's like, any ectopic, as I understand it, they're not going to want you flying or anything like that because
right.
It's such a highly vascular area, and especially when you're pregnant. But this one is, because it's so hard to identify, what happens is that it goes missed. And then you assume you're pregnant, and then it bursts because, like I said, the numbers can read off kind of wacky. And so there's it's 15 times more dangerous than a standard ectopic. And I remember only finding one, there was just like a handful of women that were writing about this. That to the point where it's like, okay, I remember this story because there were so few that went on to get pregnant.
Right. This is the first corneal ectopic that I've heard about, actually. So
yeah,
I wonder if there's people out there listening that went through it as well.
Yeah. Well, I hope so, because you don't hear of it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't wish it on anybody. But mm-hmm. What I learned is that it seemed to me, my assumption was that people either don't know they had one. It's apparently rare, and there's just not a lot of information on there. So I assumed at the time that these people are not going on and getting pregnant. Mm-hmm. And with this handful of women that I followed who did, they all were either directed or had to have directed by their doctors to have cesarean section, C-sections after at a certain point, because your uterus is compromised, because, I lost a tube at that point and part of my uterus. Mm. So because it's growing like at the point where they all meet. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I remember during my consultation before the surgery to have the removal of that pregnancy, my doctor was like, I can't take this anymore. She was like, you've got to try something different. Mm-hmm. Stop trying to get pregnant naturally, like maybe IVF. And so that really stuck in my head. And I did go seek counseling after that, and she was wonderful. And I remember the counselor saying, have you thought about other options? Have you thought about IVF? And of course we had. And at the time, my husband, prior to this point, we just weren't there. I think my husband felt that why would we pay all of this money to potentially experience this massive heartbreak that's just tearing us apart right now?
Right.
And that was his perception. And my feeling was, why wouldn't we go through every avenue? I was, like you said, like at the corner store drinking juice with you. I would have done anything.
Right. I would have met you there.
Yeah, totally. So I think we started to kind of open to that idea, and we went to this counseling session together. And she said something to me. She was like, we were kind of hemming and hawing and about that, and maybe why we wouldn't pursue IVF. And she said, why not? She said, why not? If you're thinking about it potentially, why not now with 36-year-old eggs versus now I'm 36. I've got 5 pregnancies behind me, and 38-year-old eggs. And that really stuck with me. And there was such a different feeling moving from IUIs to IVF for me. It's kind of like I felt like you had somehow, it felt like they thought you were in the big leagues now, or maybe there was more money behind it, but the IUIs felt so rote. I remember running to the appointments with my husband's sperm tucked into my jeans.
Yep.
Keep it warm. I remember going to, this was the best. I went to a gas station because I'm like, I want to make sure that my husband's like really ready to give the best of the best here. And getting him a magazine from a gas station.
Yes, girl.
I remember as a child from the 70s, you remember seeing those magazines there.
Oh, yeah. I worked at Playboy for 10 years, honey.
They don't have them anymore.
Yeah, they don't.
Like, so they had some kind of magazine that was women who work at, like, they were dressed up as firefighters, and they looked like they'd been like benching, like 120. It was hilarious. And I gave it to my husband. He's walking in for the IUI with probably a leather notebook.
Yeah.
With this little firefighter girls. Chuck's in there rolling his eyes like, is this really happening?
That's amazing.
The IUIs for us, it felt like, it never felt, I didn't even feel really great about them, but we were just doing what the medical center said would be the best before we do the next step.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember going in and thinking it was just so random, but I was so hopeful at that point, so, and I had a friend, one of my best friends had done one and it worked. So I went to the same place she went, and it didn't work for me the 2 times that I tried it. But I do remember thinking like, God, this is a weird experience. And I've never, other than my friend who did it, I'd never even heard of it before. Like, people do this? Like, what is going on? It was just so odd.
It is. And it was, for me, it was nice to, the thing that I loved about IVF, and I feel like I can be no help to somebody who has IVF as far as our protocol or whatnot, is that I felt like I could let go. Mm-hmm. I was no longer tracking stuff. I was doing what someone told me to do every day. I was doing the shot when they told me to do it. I was doing whatever protocol they said to do. I was tired of questioning what I was doing, wondering if it was the right thing, wondering if this is the perfect time to have sex with my husband, or is it too much, or should we wait 2 days? And so with IVF, it was, we got into it super fast. It happened in the spring. We didn't even go on birth control or anything like that. Mm-hmm. Or I didn't go on birth control or anything like that. It seemed to be an easy process. I responded really well to the, to all the stimulation drugs. There were 17. Yeah.
That's so lucky. And I just have to say, for anybody listening, I know there's some people out there that have a very opposite experience of IVF, and they do round after round after round after round. And you and I are the same. We only were, fortunate enough that we only had to do once. So, yes. And I know that how fortunate that is. And I do too. So I don't want to make anybody feel like, this is your story. This is your experience. So
yeah. No, 100%.
Well, it's great to hear that you had a good experience with IVF, and I know that you had a great result, right? So tell me about your daughter.
My memory of it is that it was a more relaxed pregnancy. My husband's is totally different. So maybe I'm blocking something out.
I love that.
The first trimester for me, I was a mess, according to the outside perspective. But there was one thing that occurred, 2 things that occurred as I was pregnant. Obviously, very happy time. But early on, I did get a bladder infection and had to take, medication, which caused me to bleed. And that was so frustrating. And I remember just being so mad because I'm like, it just brought it all back, and total fear. And you just do not want to feel anything down there when you're pregnant. And so to feel in pain and have the bleeding was a bit too much. So that was super scary. And it was, other than that, it seemed to tick along well and easily. And as I mentioned before, as a result of that 5th pregnancy, we knew from my doctor that our baby was going to have to be born early through a C-section. And so the plan...
Because the uterus had been compromised, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was, I guess, the risk of it, the risk of anything happening from that was just too great. And there's not a lot of science behind it. And that was always, there's not a lot of like cases behind it where they know exactly the right time, but it was decided that they would go for a C-section at 36 weeks.
Okay.
And as it turns out, about, let's see, so she was born 2 months early, and actually not 2 months. She was born like 8 weeks early. And what happened 2 days before she was born, it was a Wednesday, I go into just extreme pain that I thought honestly was going to kill me. It was that bad. We were in the hospital. The hospital didn't understand what was going on, and they could clearly see that I was pregnant. And I kept telling them, I have had a corneal ectopic. Maybe this is related to that. And it's like they didn't understand that my concern was the shape of my uterus now, not that I'm having a corneal ectopic, but that I've had one before. And so maybe this is what's causing the pain. And they're calling, the hospital's calling the doctors, and they're all coming back and saying whatever's going on now couldn't have anything to do with the corneal ectopic, because you could never be that pregnant with a corneal ectopic. And it was like there was no understanding the fact that I've had one before. Something's going on now. It doesn't seem normal. And they just didn't know what was going on, because what was going on, you couldn't see on any scan. What they could see on the scans when I was in the hospital was that the baby was okay, thankfully. And that my scar was stretching and stretching and stretching from the previous ectopic, because I had, had that removed not long before I became pregnant. It was just about 6 months before I became pregnant. And so what ultimately ended up happening is they sent me home and said that it was probably gas pains, or that they could see I was having Braxton Hicks, and maybe it was that. And I'm like, listen, no, this is not what's going on. But I went home, and the next day I had an appointment with my regular OB, and she didn't even bring up the fact that I was in the hospital. I'm like, you knew I was in the hospital last night, right? She said, yes, I heard, you were having some contractions. And I said, that could not have been it. And she said, just, if it happens again, just get in the bath and take some Tylenol. And so the next day I worked the entire next day. And then that night, the same thing is going on again, just massive pain. And I'm thinking, I can't go to the hospital again, and discharged with gas pains. And so I just kind of suffered through it. And the next morning, there was absolutely no sleep. My husband carrying me back and forth to the bath, moaning. And in the morning, it kind of started to feel a little better. And my husband actually was going to go to work that day and called his mom to come in and be there with me. And I remember at that point, the pain had alleviated to the point where I decided to call the doctor, told him what was going on, and said, it feels better. It only feels like I'm being stabbed in the back every time I breathe. And so they were like, you need to come in now before noon. It was like 10 at that time. And I come in, and they're going through all the regular motions of weighing me. And my mother-in-law is going on and on about just everything. And I had to tell her, I'm like, I cannot talk right now because I'm in so much pain. And we go through, it just seems surprising to go through the regular motions of
right. They're like, we're going to check out your ears and your eyes and your blood pressure.
Oh my God. Yeah.
You're like, someone's stabbing me in the uterus right now.
This is not good. So when I finally get in there, they check. And again, thankfully the heartbeat is normal. There's no concern with the baby. And they're doing the ultrasound, and my doctor comes in and says, we're going to have someone else. Like they reviewed the ultrasound. They had another doctor come from another town, and they walked in to look at what was going on inside. And immediately, so I remember them saying, do you see that? Do you see that? Yep. And so what they were seeing was blood clots in my belly. So I was starting to bleed internally.
Oh my God.
And at that point, my OB just held my hand and got down in my face and said, this has got to happen now. And I was on a table with getting wheeled to the hospital part of the doctor's office that I was in, and getting wheeled into surgery. And I remember right before that, my mother-in-law was with me. And at this point, I'm getting wheeled to the hospital ward and turning around and just looking at my mother-in-law and going, is my husband coming?
Mm-hmm.
Will he be here? And she's like, yep, he's on his way. And as we got on the table and they were getting ready to put in the epidural, I asked if I could go to the bathroom, just so I wanted to call my mom and let her know what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And she already, I guess, had been informed because she was bawling when she picked up the phone.
Wow.
And asked me, she said, what do I do? And I was just like, come here. And she said, okay. And I said, I love you. And that was that. And
where was she coming from?
She was coming from North Carolina.
And so, how far from you?
So we're in Minnesota. So wow. She's got a,
how terrifying for her.
Terrifying. I remember her version is she's getting on the, on the phone, calling the flight companies and just crying, bawling.
Absolutely. You're having a uterine rupture, right? That's what was going on?
Yep. So my uterus was rupturing.
And you told me in the email, you have 16 minutes to get the baby out before she goes brain dead and 30 minutes before you bleed out.
Right.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So you don't know this until after, but I am, and just incredibly thankful for all the things that happened along the way, because things can go so differently.
Yes.
It could have gone any way. And so I just, it was, that she came out, my husband got there like right before she was born, and she looked great and she's crying. And this is everything that you're waiting for. This is everything that the pain and the struggle and the emotions, have gone into, and to hear those cries. And we're so thankful that she is healthy. Mm-hmm. And we don't take that for granted for a day, or the journey that we had getting to her.
Absolutely.
But she ended up being in the NICU for about 7 weeks.
Okay. Because it was 33 weeks at that point?
Yep, 33 weeks. Yeah. And they say, I guess, that the time, how early they are is the amount of time that you're going to spend in the NICU.
Oh.
And that turned out to be true.
And tell everybody what you named your baby.
So we named her Hope.
I love that.
And for many obvious reasons, it was actually a little point of contention with my husband and I, but it was definitely him who had the idea. Mm-hmm. And, but so many strong feelings around just constantly losing that and finding it again. And through the whole story of our journey to her, it wasn't always there, but it was something that we constantly felt we had to come back to. Yeah. So we are super thankful that she's here.
I love that you said that, losing it and then finding it again. That's so beautifully said. Now you made me cry, Emily. Come on. Not cool. Oh, I'm so happy for you that she's healthy, and she's 6 years old now. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple more things I want to ask you before we wrap up. The one is that you and your husband wrote a letter to your doctors, and you included it in the email. And I just wanted you to, if you don't mind, I want to read just like a couple sentences from the letter. It's beautiful, a beautiful letter. And it was basically a thank you letter.
Of course.
And, you guys well, first of all, why don't you tell me why you guys wrote the letter, and then I'll just read a snippet of it. And then I have one more question after that.
Sure. So actually my husband wrote the letter, and as we were with the Fertility Center for such a long time. And when we became pregnant with Hope, our doctor was one of the doctors at this fertility center, actually assisted in the first IVF in the United States. And it was interesting because they'd gone with us through all of these IUIs, which I said was such a different experience from the IVF. And with the IVF, when we became pregnant, we felt you share so much of your story, and we wanted to just thank them, thank everybody involved in helping our dreams come true. And it became a personal journey for so many people involved. Even there, it seemed, when we heard the heartbeat for the first time, the nurse cried. And when we opened the door from hearing that, the doctor who helped us, who was so data-driven and analytical, was listening on the other side of the door.
Oh.
So it felt like they were a part of it. And so in response, my husband wrote this letter, and we actually held like a breakfast, a thank you breakfast for them.
Wow. So I'm just going to read the last 2 paragraphs. I will try not to cry because it's pretty emotional, but it's a beautiful letter, like I said. And at the end, he says, "Yet our exit from RMC was unceremonious, just handing us a card to announce our baby. It seemed so inadequate. I know we paid money for your services and that you are professionals, but wow, this thing is way bigger than that. It is hope filled and dreams coming true. You and the team deserve our gratitude forever, or at least until our kid turns into a snot-nosed teen." And then he says, and now I'm going to cry. "2 weeks ago, I went into our basement and found the still wrapped present for my mother on the dusty shelf. Thanks to you, we were able to shine it up again and give it to her. And thanks to you, we learned our hope wasn't misplaced and that our dreams are coming true." Hi again. Thank you so much for listening to Emily's Journey to Hope, as she calls it. And thank you so much in general for just the support that you guys are giving the podcast. People are passing it around. The emails and notes I'm getting are amazing. So I'm so happy that it's helping some of you. If you have 2 seconds to go over to Apple and write a review and rate it 5 stars, that really helps us stay on track and get noticed and messes with the algorithm, however the hell that works, but it does make a difference. So thank you guys so much, and I hope you are all well. Talk to you next time.